Chapter 23 Women of the World. The best angle on one's own country is often gained by traveling in others. Thus it was through my second trip abroad that I was led to inquire what the industrial achievement of Japan had brought as benefits to Japanese women. It is said that the Japanese Army and Navy have caught up with the best Western standards. Have the women of Japan also advanced their front line as far as the military men and the merchants of their country have advanced theirs? How do our conditions compare with those of American and other women in the West? A re-examination of the Japanese women's status went on in my mind. It is true that Japanese women are no more the mere objects of romance under cherry blossoms in long-sleeved kimonos, nor are they now the puppet-like creatures once versed only in tea ceremony and flower arrangement. They are entering professions in increasing numbers. About 85% of the women of Japan, that is, those between 15 and 59 years of age, are engaged in some kind of work. Among the occupations in which our women are engaged, agriculture, including sericulture, comes first, numbering 1,300,000 workers. Industrial workers number 800,000, of whom 70,000 are employed in the mining industry, chiefly in coal mines, and 730,000 in the mills, spinning and weaving cotton and wool. The third rating, as to the number of employees, occurs in various lines of large-scale commercial enterprise, which total 630,000, among whom the entertainers, geisha, restaurant waitresses, hotel maids, cafe girls, and dancers take first rank. The office and shop girls and the telephone operators are not as numerous as the girls who serve the amusement industry. The fourth group of working women numbers 400,000, manual laborers who work courageously in teams, chanting peculiar songs to mark time while they perform such hard tasks as driving piles into the ground for sewer construction, or tamping the ground before a house is built by means of a great pounding stone pulled up and down with a block and tackle. The fifth group comprises laborers in small-scale manufacturing, numbering 320,000. That is, those engaged in the medieval kind of factories, which employ less than 5 laborers each, to make toys, boxes, baskets, knitted goods, and other articles depending more on manual skill than on machinery. The sixth group is composed of girls in the transport business, numbering 50,000, most of whom work on urban buses. Business and professional women come last, listed as 260,000, and within this group, 37% are engaged in the medical profession as doctors, midwives, nurses, and pharmacists, 31% in educational work, mostly as primary school teachers, 75%, but with some high school and college teachers, 25% as well. We have girl typists and secretaries. We have girls in beauty parlors, in press and magazine work, in the musical profession, and to some extent in nearly every modern field. Though the enumeration of women in business and the professions is impressive, except for a few especially favored professional women, They are not paid enough to support themselves. Take the city of Tokyo, for instance. The social department of the Tokyo Municipal Office reported in 1934 that business and industrial women numbering 137,000 represented about 14% of the whole female population of the city. Of these working women, 27% handle businesses of their own. Office workers and technical experts amount to 19%, and 14% of the employees take orders merely. Examining their incomes, we find that only 10% of these women, including medical workers, popular musicians, actresses, and college professors, get above 100 yen, 10 pounds per month. 10% are receiving a monthly income of between 100 yen and 60 yen. Another 10% are earning less than 60 yen, and above 35 yen per month. The employers force them to work long hours for small pay, taking advantage of their meekness, of their sacrificial spirit. Japanese women are humble in the presence of men, and their relation towards society in general is one of submissiveness. The old feudalistic habits are responsible for this. Women have been driven out from sheltered family life to become industrial workers, but their ideas of the social proprieties remain unchanged. They view their occupation only as the means of subsistence, in a situation in which the men of the family have no actual power to support them, in spite of being the heads of families and cultivating dignified manners as the masters of the houses. Girls who have been brought up to regard the family, and not the individual, as the social unit, ignore the fact that they are cruelly underpaid for their efficiency and the amount of labor they are giving to society. They consider their service a temporary expediency, to be ended by marriage, or to go on afterwards as a sacrifice for the sake of the family system. Only the labor unions have as slogans equal standards for the sexes, equal pay for equal work. These cries, as a rule, sound foreign to the ears of both employers and employees. The deep-rooted sense of humility in service, entertained by the workers themselves, and the traditional feminine modesty have caused the cheap labor of women to be a tragic anachronism in this industrial age. In spite of the millions of tributes to the gracefulness and high moral standard of Japanese women, paid by men and women of the upper strata of society, in reality, the average Japanese woman is a dreadfully exploited creature. Among the thousands of primary school teachers in Japan, only one woman has held the chair of a principal. It is an unwritten law that no woman can become the head of a government school. It is not a question of ability, but our fatal custom that holds woman in subjection to man. A ridiculous tradition which does not remain so intact, even in China, the birthplace of Confucius. Japanese women have not yet gained the right to vote, either in national or municipal elections. A Japanese woman cannot be a higher official than a teacher in a government school. None of us can be a judge, a lawyer, or a public notary. The elimination of every personal right, such as the ownership of property and independent action from married women, is a terrible disgrace to our country. Our law forces us to serve men as half-slaves. On every side our way to equal opportunity and independence is barred. As I face these realities, cold and cruel for my countrywomen, who are human and long for the freedom to be happy themselves, while they try to make others happy, I am attacked by melancholy. What a tall wall to break through! What a long, tedious path lying ahead of us! But without striving towards a goal, we have no hope of making any progress whatsoever. Our Japanese men have not yet realized that to encourage women to develop their personalities will bring more happiness even to men, for the sexes are deeply dependent upon each other in this, as in all other respects. Then away with the so-called feminine attitude of dilly-dallying, away with shyness, timidity, and slavish servility. Break the chains which bind the whole feminine population of Japan to the old feudal system. Through such courage alone will the women of Japan be able to fashion life and labor in harmony with women's needs, and advance into the future hand in hand with men. Only after the women of Japan shall have removed the fetters which cramp their thought and action will their real womanly graciousness shine forth beyond dispute. Today they are automata afraid of their own shadows. Part 9. Marital Issues Intensify. Chapter 24. Domestic Women and Geisha Problems. In the travel diary of a philosopher, Count Hermann Kayserling refers to the Japanese woman. She cannot be taken seriously as a personality, and to this extent those people are right who place her beneath the European woman. On the other hand, it should be remembered that any perfection is better than none at all. No matter how perfect many European women are, whose type belongs to past ages, I do not know a single one among the modern women who signifies more than a hasty sketch of her specific ideal. Therefore, for this age, I must give the palm to the Lady of Japan. 10 years have passed since this book was published, and it may not be strictly fair to quote from Kayserling in such a changing period. But he continues, the Japanese lady whom I have in mind will also belong to the past ere long, just as the European grande dame does already. No aesthetically sensitive man will envisage this fate without melancholy. With her, one of the sweetest charms on earth will pass away, and nothing of equal value will replace her soon, no matter how much effort is extended in this direction. The melancholy of the German philosopher would be the grief of all the Westerners, who love to dream of Japan as a land of romance. Occidental men like to think that there is still some country whose women do not argue but always gently obey, women who can be managed without any fuss at all. Indeed, it may be a pleasant relief for some of them to come to a country where mankind is still considered absolutely superior to womankind. But have they never realized the sweet obedience is a heartbreaking code for Japanese women in this transition period? The travel diary goes on. Thus, the perfection of the Japanese woman is the direct product of her position in life, which she has occupied for centuries. Whatever may be said against this position, we owe to it the Japanese woman as she is. How miserable is the argument that she deserves a better fate, since she is so charming. The feminine type to which this Western traveler completely lost his heart has likewise been the object of praise among the Japanese. Our men exclaim, "See how Westerners praise you. Don't lose this national pride. Don't be silly enough to imitate others and thus allow your virtue to degenerate." What then are the elements of this so-called perfect feminine quality, which the German philosopher and other aesthetists, Occidental and Oriental, admire so much? The elements seem to be exquisite beauty and grace unconscious of themselves, the absence of pretense, naivety, unselfishness. With this compound, a woman becomes a doll, a living thing. She has a heart, a delicate heart, but positively no soul. As heavy iron chains fasten prisoners in their cells, so the masterful pens of Western lauding Japanese women's doll-like feminine charms serve as bonds, strengthening native weapons of control. Nevertheless, modern Japanese women are chafing at their jailers and saying that the praise of women devoid of personality is an intellectual and social disgrace. At the same time, we are taking the influence of education into account. The great Learning for Women, written by Kabara Eken, 1631 through 1714, a great teacher of the Tokugawa feudal times, was through long years the prime guide in female education. Our ancestral mothers all tried their best to carry out his ideals, and it was this body of wisdom which, as I have said, my devoted and beloved grandfather willed to me at his death. Its fanatically rigid discipline is disclosed in such quotations as follow. The honorable teacher says, "Woman has no other place but her husband's house to live in, and so in Great China, woman's marriage is called returning home. Even if her husband's house is poor, she should have no regret. Poverty is the misfortune heaven bestows on her, and she should, on no account whatever, leave her husband's house. This is woman's way, taught by the divine masters of old. If a woman dishonors her way and is divorced, she carries a lifelong shame with her. There are 7 reasons for which a woman may rightly be divorced. These are called the 7 rules for putting away a woman. Rule 1. Put away a woman who does not obey her parents-in-law. Rule 2. Put away a woman who does not bear a child, for woman is needed to beget the heir. But if she has the right spirit, good manners, and is not jealous, she may stay and adopt a son within her family. If a concubine of her husband has a child, the childless wife need not be dismissed. Rule 3. Put away a woman if she is lax in morals. Rule 4. Put away a woman if she is jealous. Rule 5. Put away a woman if she is leprous or has other undesirable diseases. Rule 6. Put away a woman if she is talkative and impertinent. For a talkative woman causes discord among the relatives and breaks the harmony of the family. Rule 7. Put away a woman if she steals things. Elaborating these domestic principles, the honorable teacher continues, when a woman is divorced, after once marrying, she is disgraced all her life, even if she is married again to a rich husband, for it is against the way of woman. A woman has no master but her husband, whom she should serve with respect and humility, never with a light attitude and disrespect. In a word, the way of woman is obedience. To her husband she should be submissive and harmonious, serving him with gentle and humble expression of the face and speech. Never should she be impatient and wilful, proud and impertinent. This is her first duty. She should absolutely follow the husband's teaching and wait for his direction in everything of which she is not sure. If the husband puts a question to her, she should answer in the correct manner. An incomplete answer is a piece of incivility, not to be excused. If the husband gets angry and acts accordingly, she should fear and be ruled by him, never contradict him. The husband is heaven to the wife. Disobeying heaven only incurs righteous punishment. The common evil natures of woman are to be willful, to be offended easily and be reproached, to be inclined to abuse others, to be jealous, to be shallow-witted. 7 or 8 out of every 10 women have all of these 5 sins. This is what makes woman inferior to man. She should know herself and conquer her weaknesses. Above all, shallowness of mind is her worst fault, and is the cause of all the other evils. Woman is the negative principle, like night and darkness. Therefore woman is ignorant and does not foresee anything, does not know what is despicable in the eye of others, what is a hindrance to her husband and her children. Her ignorance is even such that she reproves and bears ill will towards those who have no cause for being reproached, and cannot tell her who are her true enemies. In bringing up her children, she merely follows instinct and not reason, so she cannot educate them properly. Utterly devoid of wisdom, she should humbly follow her husband in everything. In the ancient teachings, it is said that when a girl baby is born, she should be laid for 3 days under the house floor. This is because man symbolizes heaven and woman, earth. Therefore, woman should follow man always with humility. Even when she has done something laudable, she should never be proud of it. If she has her faults pointed out by others, she should acknowledge them at once, and make amends with humbleness of heart, in order never again to be put in the same disgrace. Even if she is scorned, she should not be offended, but be patient and prudent. If she follows these teachings, there will be harmony between man and wife, peace in the family, and a long conjugal honor to the woman. Woman should always be careful to keep herself blameless. She should get up early and retire late, never lie down during the day, keep busy, not neglecting spinning, weaving, and sewing. She should not drink much of such things as tea and sake wine, should never see and hear such lewd drama at the kabuki theater, popular songs, and jarouji music. Also, she should refrain from going to shrines, temples, and other crowded places before she is 40 years old. Reviewing these teachings, we now understand how negative our feudal education was. The author of the book was not particularly hard on women considering the tendency of the age. and yet he never thought of elevating or even improving a sex held in ignorance from which all these feminine evils could not but spring, and for which the only cure was, in his opinion, earthly humility. In truth, the teacher may be called fairly reasonable, when we remember that the perfection of the family system was the aim of every woman's education. For the tyranny of the family system, women had to be mentally killed, deprived of the strength with which to ward off the disgraces heaped upon them. The last of the 7 rules for putting away a woman says, "Put away a woman who steals things." This emphasis on stealing indicates that the married woman, who is necessarily propertyless, except for her clothes given to her by her parents at her wedding, is sometimes tempted to use for herself or pass on to others the family properties without her husband's permission. It is a sin which she cannot avoid sometimes, and yet it is so fatal to her honor. What Western woman of the 20th century can imagine the position into which some of her Eastern sisters are still driven? My father has been progressive enough not to force this moral standard unconditionally on his daughter, but I have watched my mother conduct herself all through her life in a literal following of what is written in this great book of morals. A new social system and a new social consciousness in harmony with it seem, to me, never to arrive together. People's ideas always lag behind economic events, even though they live, to all appearances, in a changed age. Although those Japanese women who are working in their own retail shops with their husbands, those girls who have entered the army of factory workers, those women who work in the fields side by side with their men, are still bound by feudal notions of good and evil inherited from their mothers. In reality, their lives are not confined as rigidly to feudalism as those of upper-class women. Workers of any kind are more than obedient dolls, and yet while Japanese women are participants in modern productive methods for reasons of family income, they usually try to model their behavior according to this ancient book of ethics. While carrying the heavy yoke of labor, Japanese women have thus cultivated the power of endurance to a remarkable degree. Their negative strength has been developed amazingly. For instance, the women of my class never betray their agony at the moment of childbirth, nor do they use any sort of medicine to reduce the pain. At the moment of a great sorrow or a mental shock, they know how to control themselves and face the circumstances stoically. This is their great price of personal pride. This is our national pride in them. However, these negative virtues of the Japanese women have surely led men to extreme self-indulgence. It is this everlasting patience of women in the presence of men's dissolute practices and unfair domestic conduct that perpetuates the geisha system in Japan. The geisha, with their tea houses and the licensed prostitutes of the Yoshiwara section of Tokyo and many other cities of Japan, are often an exotic lure for Western tourists. Some foreigners spend just a few days in our country But however crowded the schedule, they seem never to forget to exploit the gay quarters and set down in print their impressions. Usually they are extravagant in their praise of the geisha while condemnatory of the Yoshiwara girls, but occasionally a Westerner is able to look at the system of entertainment by courtesans which exist in almost every Oriental country in some form, with a keener insight, and even to extend cooperative sympathy to the native social reformers who seek to abolish what is, to them, a blot on Eastern society. Count Kayserling describes the geisha institution from a very masculine point of view. He says, "The geisha have the privilege and the duty of fostering the old traditional forms. Thus they are the guardians of the Holy of Holies." His pen goes on, "In Japan, baseness seems unknown even to the lowest wench. Here all femininity is bent on charm, and charm is inculcated in them as an end in itself, since the women do not see anything dishonoring in selling themselves to a strange man for money, and the man sees nothing shameful in visiting these pleasure houses. An atmosphere of harmless cheerfulness prevails in these establishments, just as in Europe among children round the Christmas tree." Is he condemning our society, or is he making fun of it? Perhaps the German philosopher really speaks for men at large. I do not wish to be too severe on this distinguished writer. Tasty wine has its medicinal virtue, and gentle entertainment by young girls of exquisite charm is not bad in itself for any man. Japanese tea houses are undeniably lovely, and the geisha have learned through long training how to make themselves attractive to men in such surroundings. To spend the evening playing, laughing, and being amused by beautiful women, with nothing but men's happiness on their minds, is apparently a masculine idea of paradise. But tea houses have been valued not only as congenial places for relaxation, they are also important council rooms for statesmen and clubs for businessmen. Austere gentlemen who enter them stiff and formal, after drinking cups of sake and chatting lightly about nothing with girls taught to make them unbend, often open their hearts and reveal their purposes as they would never do elsewhere. Least of all with their wives. They discuss with these young women the theater, movies, boxing, and wrestling matches, politics, and markets. Every possible line of contemporary interest is chatted about, the girls always appearing sympathetic, even when they tease. Because of the need of it, many geisha are learning English, putting their little notes on vocabulary into their paper handkerchief bags, hidden between the folds of their brocade sashes. The girls in tea houses dance the foxtrot with their guests to the rhythm of jazz bands. They are trying to be up to date when modernity is in demand, while preserving their traditional skill in Japanese dancing, singing, and playing musical instruments. Almost every important function in Japan must still have feasting on the program, and geisha for entertainment. The stiff and artless wives are entirely expelled from conviviality. They are allowed to attend wedding ceremonies, memorial services for the dead, and celebrations of old age with their relatives, but they stay away from affairs in the tea houses. When a gay party is to be given there or at a public restaurant, the host calls upon the proprietor to have ready the required number of geisha. No cooking is done in the tea room, but food may be sent in from outside. When a man invites his friends to a restaurant, he must have permission from the police to bring in the geisha. Generally, the entertainers for a large party include girls called hangyoku, from about 13 to 16 years of age, dressed in colorful kimonos with sweeping sleeves. Mature girls from about 16 to 24 years of age, and a few older women, corresponding all in all to the number of invited guests. After entering the room with polite bows, the entertainers take their seats, one in front of each guest, to whom they serve sake only, the food being carried around by plain maids. At the guest's command, and during the eating and drinking, the geisha play the samisen, sing, and dance. The tea house proprietor charges the host for the girls by the hour. The music and dancing are an additional charge, so this kind of Japanese entertainment, on an accredited scale, costs at least 30 yen per person just for a short evening's pleasure, which is twice as much as the cost of a grand hotel dinner in Japan. Away from the geisha, our upper-class Japanese men are usually so frigid of manner that a Western-type dinner becomes hopelessly punctilious if they try to show honor to tourists in that way. In the geisha business, the popular girls often go to many parties in one evening. Even a brief appearance is expensive for the host, but the young entertainers do not get the money for themselves, though their fine apparel is expensive. Hence, a popular geisha, almost without exception, has a patron who pays the bills for her purchases of kimonos and accessories. Men are often generous about the sums they bestow upon their favorites, for these gifts help to build for them the reputation of being wealthy, but almost none of them would spend so much upon his wife. On the contrary, a man takes it for granted that a wife has no need to show off her attractions outside the family, since she is thoroughly protected in the home. Besides, it is her duty to be thrifty and to devote herself to household economy, letting her husband have a wide range for his abilities. The patron of a geisha is also responsible for the bills incurred in connection with her frequent music and dancing rehearsals, again for a public performance, where her prestige calls for fine costuming, stage setting, accompanying musicians, and the distribution of rich gifts. He must open his purse without stint. If the man pays all her debts to her proprietor for her education and interest on the proprietor's investment, usually calculated to be a sum ignoring the rules of arithmetic, then he can either marry her or have her as his mistress and let her own a house for him alone to visit. Often he buys for her the privilege of running a geisha establishment herself. It is not so simple to become a famous geisha as to become a movie star. The training for the geisha is longer and far more precise. as a geisha is supposed to be, an artist, or it would be better to say, since she is an art performer, her discipline is rigorous. A handsome appearance is, of course, an essential requirement, and poor parents with good-looking daughters often maintain themselves by selling their offspring at a tender age to geisha houses. In such cases, the girls are commonly adopted legally as daughters of the house to avoid the actual form of human trade. The young apprentice in turn calls her mistress mother and the elder girls sisters. Filial duties and absolute obedience to the commands of her elders are enforced upon her. Often the whip of discipline lashes the girls severely, but as elders may own juniors, there is no legal redress. Outsiders are helpless to stop this kind of cruel treatment, but it cannot be denied that the strict training is what gives distinction to a Japanese courtesan. The education law requires that the very young apprentices shall be sent to a primary school in the daytime, but after school hours they pass to the teachers of dancing, singing, and musical instruments. In some cities, there are geisha schools where girls can combine all their lessons under one roof, which is a very convenient arrangement for them. Scarcely have the little creatures finished the elementary grades when foster mother and elder sisters begin their polishing. This work starts on the girls' sunburnt faces, from which is removed every sign of vigor, in order that they may appear like excellent white dolls. The well-polished butterflies captivate men's hearts, or curiosity, by whispering 1,000 words of love, as the profession requires them to do so. But none of them is supposed to make real love to any man, unless she is ordered by her mistress. But it is far from the truth if a Westerner thinks that these human beings see nothing dishonorable in selling themselves to any strange man for money. The whole business is regularized. A code of honor prevails, even in this system. Girls who evade its rules are called by a term of disgrace: coming, lying without seeing the man, geisha, which adjective is often used for other misdemeanors, such as a politician's unfaithfulness to his party. There is no dishonor, according to this code, attached to a geisha's prostitution at the bequest of her mistress. Nevertheless, a popular theme for that department of our literature, which specializes in the underworld, is a geisha struggling against the foster mother's command to sell herself to a hated patron. For usually a rich but coarse and elderly male is abominable to a young girl who would rather have a handsome youth for her sweetheart, even if he is too poor to please the geisha's owner. There is no escaping some kind of patron. Someone must pay for the debut of a grown-up apprentice. After the debut, usually at the age of 16 or 17, the debutante, to indicate her maturity, changes her costume entirely, cutting her sleeves to the ordinary length and dressing her hair in the adult fashion. But visitors to the tea houses must also conform to certain rules. It is not supposed to be shameful for men to be entertained by a company of these pleasant women in a group. A personal intimacy with one of them is not considered proper. At the first-class tea houses, only customers of long acquaintance, or new customers with reliable introductions, bearing names indicating high social position, are acceptable to the mistress in charge. She is generally a woman grown stout with alcohol, and always a person of political and business ability. She manages men of power and wealth as easily and skillfully as a Chinese juggler trifles with his balls and plates. The mistresses are really very influential women, governing this flower and willow society made up of tea houses, geisha establishments, kabuki theaters, and actors, teachers of various arts of amusement, and the men who visit these places, not forgetting the diseases which they bring. While the women of our intellectual class are hardly earning their own bread, while not a single chair of a highly responsible kind in the universities is open to any of them. The women of the underworld are running this peculiar business on a large scale, and many of them are getting enormous incomes in the process. Their power over the prominent gentlemen of Japan is gained not by challenging in the open, but artfully and tactfully whispering. The secret politics of the country, business negotiations, and conspiracies of every kind are talked over in the privacy of the tea houses. A group of men with attending geisha may be thoroughly secluded in a quiet compartment in the tea house, without fear of facing others unpleasantly. Absolute privacy is guaranteed. The quietness with which reigns in such places, giving, in the midst of the city, the feeling of having come miles and miles away to a country villa, is hinted at by the wooden gate, and stepping stones, well sprinkled with water, which lead towards the entrance hall. The clog keeper kneels to receive one's shoes, clogs or sandals, and put them carefully away with the canes. Then a sedately dressed maid makes obeisance and guides one along the zigzag corridors of polished wood or mat covering which enclose a small inner garden, picturesquely landscaped with a pondlet, stone urns, and a little grassy hill, upon which a plain wood or red lacquered shrine for the fox god is placed to invite prosperity to the house. Finally, one reaches the reserved room, not large necessarily, but very neatly furnished. The paper sliding doors, the screens, the soft-colored walls, and the carefully selected wood of the tokonoma pillar are all calculated to create an atmosphere of refined taste. The setting for tea forbids a gaudy effect. Many Japanese writers practically live in these houses, for they say that they can work efficiently only in this congenial atmosphere. However, because of the unwholesome economic and ethical, if artistic, surroundings, public opinion in Japan is becoming critical of this way of life, for doubtless it is the source of dark shadows on Japanese society, and as a matter of fact, whenever there is a social scandal, a tea house or tea houses are always involved. When a customer arrives at one of these retreats, not for a party, but for quiet pleasure, the customary procedure is to have one of the maids telephone to his wife that he will not be home for supper. A gentleman who is waited on at all times will not steal away to spend an evening with other women so boldly as to neglect to notify his wife of his absence. He is too formal for that. The gentle wife, who has been preparing her husband's favorite dishes in expectance of his homecoming and a happy supper table, now has to eat alone, or with her children only, knowing full well that her beloved husband reposes in the amorous air of the tea-house, listening to the flatteries of the geisha. But the wife waits and waits as the clock turns to the limit of the day, stirring the dying charcoal in the brazier in the winter time to keep warm, and burning mosquito sticks endlessly in summer. The august mate returns late in the night or early in the morning, with hot face and staggering feet, and to be bowed gracefully into the house. If he is reproached, it is not then and there. Contrary to the customs of our neighboring country, the Japanese girls often send their tipsy guest home in the dead of night. Prominent statesmen, high officials, leading businessmen, and others have the privilege of leading a life of this sort, unhealthy and expensive, without much effective criticism. The wives of such men, of course, feel chagrin in the circumstances. Courageous middle-class women are inclined to rebuke their husbands frankly, but the ladies of the upper class cling so religiously to the behavior established for well-conducted wives that they make noble attempts to stifle the call of their hearts. Combativeness avails little, so long as these ladies are economically helpless. Thus men enlarge their opportunities for pleasure, while wives cling to the interminable household tasks, like goldfish in the pond, having slight chance to see the world at work or at play. There are about 10,000 women in the geisha profession in Tokyo alone, and about 80,000 in the whole of Japan. Those geisha who hold the first rank have incomes 4 or 5 times larger than those of women in intellectual professions. But the geisha mothers usually control these incomes, and the girls are obliged to spend so much for the sake of prestige that there has never been a geisha in the millionaire ranks. It is hard to keep pace in this profession after physical attraction is gone, on account of the constant smoking, drinking, irregular eating, and thick powdering, the lack of fresh air and outdoor exercise. The geisha lose their youthful charm much earlier than ordinary women. Some of them marry men whom they like, or by whom they are purchased with money. Some spend their lives as private mistresses. Some run geisha houses of their own, either inherited from their geisha mothers or bought for privilege. Some become teachers of music and dancing for the younger girls. A few remain professional geisha as long as they live, a 70-year-old geisha not being a monstrosity. Those who were once most popular and clever in entertaining people make the most popular proprietors of tea houses or restaurants catering to the trade. Yoshiwara in Tokyo, Shimabara in Kyoto, and other licensed prostitute quarters present a separate problem from the geisha quarters and tea houses, although there are common problems which they raise. The license for a geisha carries permission to sell one's art only. That for a prostitute is what is literally indicated in the word. There are in Japan about 52,000 women who come under the pitiful brand of licensed prostitutes. Some low-class geisha have the two licenses together. However, before we decide upon any practical and effective measure to do away with this shameful institution, we have to take account of the fact that it has been a deep-rooted historical phase of our social growth. Prostitution seems a universal social phenomenon, though it may arise from different causes in different societies. In Japan, it existed from ancient times in the form of religious rites practiced by sibyls and priestesses all through our ancient history, and with the formation of the samurai class about the 12th century. The prostitution of women was given a semi-religious warrant. There was a large class of slaves in those days, but prostitutes were not so ranked. With the usurpation of power by the samurai, the sexual morality of the warrior class was gradually refined, especially on the women's side. A high sense of chastity was maintained by the wife, and compared with her restraint, prostitution seemed more immoral. However, it never declined. On the contrary, it grew with the increase in the precariousness of the warriors' lives, rendered unavoidable in a feudal society, and with the brutality of feudal wars, marked by the selling of women captives. It developed rapidly throughout the country, spreading wherever a town rose under the power of a local daimyo, until at last, in 1528, the bankrupt Ashikaga shogunate achieved the idea of taxing immorality, thereby giving it special recognition and destroying its secret machinations. Licensed prostitution flourished in the open from this time on, accompanied by a prosperous traffic in women. Daughters of unfortunate samurai, of indebted tradesmen, and of hungry peasants were bought and sold in 1,000 ingenious ways. It was the first of the Tokugawa shoguns, who segregated prostitutes, enclosing the brothels in licensed quarters. This was the origin of our Yoshiwara and other so-called pleasure enclosures, yukaku. Miserable women were gathered here by cold-blooded brokers and brothel proprietors, and shut up in most cases for life. In the case of the physically exploited, the run of life was short. With the return of peace and the rise of the burgess in the last stages of the Tokugawa feudal regime, the pleasure enclosures became the center of social life for men, offering refuge from the rigidity of the family system. Some produced grand courtesans, refined and proud, who raised the standard of men's cultural taste, and so introduced the professional entertainer, the geisha of today. Shocking, but tempting, must have been this peculiar institution of Japan to the Western visitors of early Meiji times. For many, a Madame Butterfly and Okichi, with many of the more practical Madame Chrysanthemums, became familiar figures to gallant foreign gentlemen. However, the Meiji government was thoroughly ashamed of this barbaric institution, and within 5 years of its establishment, it prohibited the traffic in girls and declared the abolition of licensed prostitution. This sudden reform only distributed the evil through the entire society, and in less than a year, the government reinstated the licensing system, with the proviso that the women were to be regarded as employees, and not as human chattels, to be bought and sold. A physical examination was strictly enforced on the licensed prostitutes. It would be far from just to condemn as immoral the Orient as a whole on account of its licensed prostitution. More than 90% of these girl victims sink into this shameful servitude, not because they want to, but because they must help their poverty-stricken families by this means. It is natural that Kaiserling should observe that the atmosphere of the Japanese brothels is not unclean. The relative refinement of these places springs from the girl's sense of filial duty. Natural depravity and vanity have not thrust them into this inferno. However, no matter what have been the reasons and background for the existence and growth of these professions, both the low-class prostitutes and the geisha are the enemies of domesticity, and as such enemies of civilization in Japan. Owing to the receding of feudalistic sentiments among men and women, amid the change from complicated formality to free and open conduct, the demand for geisha and licensed prostitution is decreasing, though its rate may be slow. Unhappily, cafe waitresses, professional entertainers whose service is within the restaurant, girls in the public halls, who dance by the ticket system, are new professionals replacing the old. Our licensed prostitution is a grave problem for us, and it has become even an international issue. There have been many attempts to remove this blot from our society, but so far none has succeeded. One thing that impressed the public with the cruelty of this institution was the Yoshiwara tragedy at the time of the Great Earthquake. The women of this quarter, unaccustomed to liberty of movement, lost time in running from the pursuing conflagration after the earthquake, and many of them were burnt to death. This horrible fact roused righteous indignation among the Japanese, and especially among the women of Tokyo, who have learned to organize while taking part in the relief work after the earthquake, now resolved that there should be no permanent handicap of this kind for their sex, and determined to end the licensed prostitution for all time. The National Anti-Prostitution League, which had been organized some time previously, now met with wide support from various women's organizations, notably the Christian Women's Social Reform Organization, Fujin Kyofukai, and the Alliance of Suffragettes. At present, Japanese law sanctions the right of licensed prostitutes and geisha to free themselves from forced restraint, if their debts can be paid in some other way. So the Salvation Army and several women's civic organizations are doing their best to protect these reformed women. Reform movements and organizations are no doubt doing much good in purifying our society ethically. But more is involved than ethics, even if they succeed in freeing prostitutes and geisha from their cruel bonds, so long as there remains the need to exchange personal charm for rice, their profession, whether licensed or not, will remain. It may even expand if the Depression throws more economic wreckage into the streets. Nor have the greatest among Western countries yet succeeded in destroying this evil at the root. I have had a number of opportunities to meet geisha girls in the past, either at men's parties at which I have had the rare privilege of being present, or in personal association, which I enjoyed, especially during the time I was taking dancing lessons with some of the geisha. As party entertainers, they all look pretty, merry, and bold, but when I talk with them personally, I find them modest and peculiarly melancholy. As personal friends, they may show some individuality, but as professional women, they are all alike, being clipped and trained after a certain standard of beauty, which is no more than the prettiness of uniformly shaped, sized, and colored carnations and roses raised in commercial hothouse. They may dazzle our eye a moment with their well-studied painting and dressing up, but not for long. The geisha are regarded by men as commercial articles, and they are manufactured accordingly, each with a price mark tagged on the neck, somewhat differentiated with reference to age, art, and talent. At any rate, they are ready-made beauties, and are, like other ready-made things, uniformly patterned. We often see them in trains accompanying men on pleasure trips. At such times they try their best to look like wives, with their quiet clothes and restrained hairdressing, but at a glance anybody can detect the difference. Even when properly married, they cannot look and act like ordinary wives. So markedly standardized is the making of the geisha. The beauty of the geisha can be put under one category of ikki, which is a unique word in the Japanese language, since the geisha are a class peculiar to our society. No foreign tongue can give even an approximate equivalent for this singularly Japanese expression. A friend of mine, Professor Shidzue, in the literature department of Kyoto Imperial University, who is an authority on the cultural history of the West, as well as of Japan, interprets this word ikki in his book, The Analysis of Ikki, as something a little less simple and common than the English word smart, as a refined coquetry, a little more specific and narrowed than the quality expressed by the French word chic. It is analyzed as the Buddhist spirit of resignation and apathy combined with the inherited pride of the Edo people, which could spurn power and wealth if honor was at stake. This pride appearing in the geisha as their strong revolt against men's tyranny. It refines the geisha's forced professional coquetry and creates peculiar beauty. Within the definition of this word, I can recognize and admire the geisha's beauty and charm in a detached way. I am not one of those Confucian Puritans who despise these girls merely as evil women. I know too well what they suffer. It is undeniable that the existence of the geisha is a grave menace to good housewives and a force destructive of the peace of family life. However, I am not so blind as to overlook the social forces that call it forth. Geisha are simply driven into the profession. They know they are grieving the innocent wives and are heartily sorry for it. The puppet play by Chikamatsu, based on the life of a public prostitute, Koharu, later made into a kabuki drama, shows best the fated relation of the geisha and the wife. The story is a triangular plot, of course. The geisha Koharu and the Osaka merchant Kamiji, who is married, fall in love with each other, in spite of themselves, and decide to commit a double suicide, the conventional solution in the Japanese society of Edo days. Even in their last embrace, Koharu, tenderly thinking of her lover's wife, proposes to die separately in order not to put her to too much shame. She apologizes herself at the final moment for taking the man away from his angelic lady, but she never triumphs over her love. The wife, on the other hand, does not blame her husband for idling in the gay quarter, for she knows well how the pressure of the family system kills every bud of human pleasure and causes the reactionary outburst in the geisha quarters. She is sorry for him, and in order to shield him from the strict father, she often pawns a precious kimono to settle his debts. It is not servility, but the purely unselfish love of a good wife. There is something in this play everlastingly appealing to the Japanese mind, long nurtured in a feudal society, and this one of the kabuki plays I never weary of seeing. I think that the geisha have never since of old been happy in their profession, that they have not lured men of their own free will into dissipation. On the contrary, they are pitiably ashamed of their position, and almost unduly conscious of their sinfulness in stealing the money and attention that husbands owe their wives. I am sorry for those who are forced by our singular social circumstances to take up such a calling, to be gaily dressed but terribly exploited workers. I grieve over their misunderstanding of the meaning of our traditional filial piety, which persuades them to be geisha in order to relieve temporarily with their own persons some family distress. It is a too near-sighted view to regard them as the direct enemy of the oppressed wives. It is our society that not only tolerates but in fact sponsors the existence of such a profession. Men should be ashamed of taking advantage of it. Awakened women cannot but feel it their duty to work towards the removal of this horrible disgrace imposed on their sex. Only where security is assured to those who work can love and marriage properly exist. Conversely, only where love and marriage are both enlightened and possible to all can prostitution disappear. The welfare of the state is intimately bound up with the issue.